All right, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. All right, this feels weird. Nobody on the front row, but that's fine. Cool. I don't bite. No, but so I guess just to echo what Jonathan said, I appreciate the time, all of you being here. I know it was really not the perfect weather for you to come this late of the day, so I appreciate that, and then to Dida and Jonathan for setting this up together. All right, so if you remember from, I guess, what you kind of signed up for, the topic for today is about kind of scaling software development teams, right? So I'm sure talking to you in some cases, somebody are kind of doing IT staffing, somebody are founders of their own startup. So I think there's a little bit of a mix of a little bit of everything here in the room. And just the harsh truth about scaling software development teams is that it's not a walk in the park. It's not easy. It's very challenging. But the one thing that I want to kind of emphasize here today is that it's not only about finding the right talent. Finding the right talent is one thing, and yes, it's probably one of the most difficult things about scaling teams, but it's not the only thing, right? So there's other things to consider that need careful planning in order to properly scale software development teams, which is kind of something that I'm going to be focusing on here today, right? So to start with, right, I have a kind of list of things to go with, right? Before we go into the people, which, like I said, is one of the most important, if not the most important, I want to start by talking about something that is often kind of left unseen, right? Which is the product vision, right? I think I've been at places before in my career where people got seed money or funding, or they just want to reduce their time to market because of their competitors, whatever. There's a number of reasons why they want to add more horsepower to their teams, and they go on and recruit people, or they got this nearshore or offshore, whatever the case might be. But at once the people are in day one, they really got nothing to work on, right? Or they think they have something to work on, but there's really nothing much for them to do, right? So first and foremost, before going in and tasking yourself with adding more people to your teams, is making sure that from a product vision, I don't need like a full spec of what the feature would do and do, but from a product roadmap perspective, a vision of what's ahead of us, making sure that we understand what the market needs are, going and talking with UX designers and UI people, and making sure we got mock-ups and they go talk to customers and figure out what they really need and understand that very well. I think it's one of the first critical things that need to be done before you even start considering growing your teams, right? So once that's well understood, once you understand the market, what the needs are for all of that to happen, then I would say that you are not fully ready, but there's other things to consider. But you're somewhat ahead of everybody in making sure that you got a really solid roadmap, so that when the team gets and is onboarded, then you hit the ground running and they start executing such vision and such roadmap with your teams, right? So that's one thing, right? Second is, right, finding the right talent. Right, so I think in the tech community, we are, well, not with this economy and the layoffs that we've seen, sadly, this last few months, but typically recruiting people and recruiting the right people, it's a very kind of challenging thing to do, right? There's not a lot of software developers out there, and those that are out there already have a kind of good job. Some of them are interested and inclined into other positions because they get bored or whatever. So you need to find creative ways in order to attract that talent into your business. There's other kind of things you can do, like I think there's a few here that do nearshore. There's others that do offshore, which are also kind of cost-effective ways in which you can get the right talent in the door. There are definitely kind of other options as well. But making sure that you have the right talent is also a critical component of this, right? So once that's done, the other thing is so by the time you want to scale your team, you started with a small team, right? Probably that's you on today's world. You got a small team. Small teams are great. In my opinion, they often also work a lot better than big teams, right? Because they're nimble. They collaborate very well with each other. Everybody's aware of what's going on 100% of the time, and they execute very well, right? So those people, those individuals that started from your small team before you kind of go into growing, that's the people that you want to develop and you want to invest your time in, right? You need to promote from within and make sure that you're developing such talent, not only because they're the ones that started the code base, in this case, if you're working with software in your product day one, which is an important thing, but also because they understand your culture, right? They understand your values. They're with you for a reason other than a paycheck, really, at that point, right? So for those individuals and for other individuals that will come down the road, you need to make sure that there's a proper career path planned for them and outlined, and that they can understand, okay, if I stay here, how can I grow in this organization, right, in this business? So I think that's also critical for those people to promote, making sure that you're promoting from within. Now, in that case, I think I've seen before where, like, a software developer, typically there's a junior, they're mid, they're senior, and by the time they're senior, not everybody would like to go into management, right? Which is like the, I guess, simplest path for them to continue to grow as a tech lead or as an engineering manager, director of engineering, etc. There's a lot of people that will just like to code 24/7, and no matter what, that's what they would like to do, right? For those individuals, I think as well, need to make sure that there's a plan for them. So once they've hit senior, what's ahead of them? If they want to continue to grow, maybe they go into the infrastructure team or they become your architects, etc. But make sure that there's a plan for everybody in the organization, not only for those that would like to go into management, which is also certainly something that is also pursuable for them, right? So we talked a little bit about finding the talent and then developing from within, right? But once you go outside and hire from any kind of external place, the other thing to consider as you're scaling is day one, what are those individuals going to do and how are they going to contribute in your business, right? So the onboarding, especially in this time of year in tech, needs to be fast, it needs to be clear, right? As we onboard individuals into our firm day one, there needs to be a plan almost to the day, and I've seen it in places where it's all like to the hour from 9 to 10. This is what I'm expecting from you to do. I'm going to give you access to all the accounts that you need. I'm going to need you to complete all of these trainings, right? Some industries might have more requirements depending on the industry that they play at, right? Where they might need to do security trainings, anti-harassment trainings, et cetera, but make sure there's an outline for them to start contributing, right? I've seen in some places where day two, they're already contributing to the code after they're being onboarded, right? So it is doable. It's definitely not easy, but it takes a lot of work to make sure that your process is very clear and easy to follow for those people to join your organization and start contributing. Right now, the other thing that is important is to make sure you got to define a team structure. So started with a small team and you're growing into 2 teams, 3, 4 teams, or 10 or 20 teams. How are you going to structure those teams? Who's going to do what, right? So typically what I've seen work best in is something that we do where I work at right now is that we build teams and then we deploy those teams into different clients and accounts, right? So a team is comprised of a product owner, a tech lead, several developers, a QA individual at a minimum, right? And those individuals is a team and they work together and they have working experience with other accounts in other places in other industries, so they know each other, right? So you're reducing the risk of forming a team and expecting of them to continue to work together and work together well, right? And find ways of working. It's all of that. It's in the past. They know how they are friends or buddies. They've been coding long nights for quite some time at this point, and we deploy these teams into them, right? But as we are deploying these teams, it's important from a contribution perspective. How are you going to structure them, right? So are you going to define areas of expertise within your product and you're going to dedicate those teams into that area of expertise? Or are you going to dedicate a team to be kind of dealing with architecture components? Are you have a team of infrastructure and then product teams? Are you going to have teams dedicated to support your customers, et cetera, right? So how are these teams going to contribute? And then more importantly, not only how they're going to contribute to your code, but how are they not going to be stepping over each other, right? Which is, I think, one of the most difficult tasks of scaling is everybody's contributing towards a common goal, right? That's the business goal. But at a team level, everybody's contributing to their team goal, right? Which is smaller, and they're all aligned into the strategic vision of the business, right? So one of the key things that I think as kind of businesses or tech teams are starting to grow is, yes, there's the team, there's the tech lead, there's the engineer managers, there's the director of products, product managers, and all these roles. But one of the things that I kind of have been doing in, I guess, for quite some time now, it's in this kind of program management, right? Of this PMO office that I think at first is something that people don't like, right? Because it's like processes and you're going to slow us down, etc. But it is needed at that level, right? It's not about slowing us down. It's making sure that we're doing the right thing and that we're not kind of making things difficult for others, right? The same thing is around those lines. A key part of a PMO office that once you kind of scale into bigger teams is dealing with a lot of the risk management and change management that comes along with break programs, right? Every team, as they work on their features, on whatever's been assigned to them, will kind of run into a number of issues all the time, right? So it is part of that PMO office to work with those teams to, one, identify those risks, right? Identify what are the consequences of if such risk actually comes true. And then more importantly, how are we mitigating that risk if there's any way that we can mitigate that risk? And then talking to the stakeholders and making sure that that mitigation is acceptable, or if there's no mitigation, that we're accepting that risk if it comes to happen, right? And then on the second hand, which is something that when you're dealing with smaller teams is a lot easier to deal with, is the whole change management perspective, right? When you're a small team and the designer is sitting right next to you and he or she makes a change in the design and then tells you, hey, I don't want this button, I want this button over here, I want this modal here, whatever. It's easy and it's as fast and is well understood, and then the coder will go into applying that change. But when you're dealing with a software development team of 100 people, there's 20 designers working in different things. How do you keep track of all of those changes, right? And I mean, I think we can all agree that changes are nature of the business that we're in. I think instead of us being, I guess, kind of angry at so many changes all the time, we need to embrace those changes, right? And but at the same time, when we have a deadline and we're dealing with changes, is something needs to give, right? Which is the important part that everybody in the table needs to understand, right? If we're changing this functionality to our new next version, are we pushing our timeline? Can we push our timeline? I guess that's the first question. If not, okay, well, if we're adding this new scope, what scope are we subtracting from what we originally planned for, right? So typically that in smaller teams, like I said, I think it's well managed and in a small team. But as you grow and are you dealing with scope changes and risk across many different teams, a PMO office is really helpful in those scenarios, right? Now, along the same lines of a PMO office are the processes, right? So when you're small, I think it's important to define what are your kind of best practices for coding, what are your best practices for your software development lifecycle. How are you going to be doing code reviews? How many reviewers are you going to be kind of enforcing for each PR that you're putting out there? What's your QA process going to look like? And what's your deploy process going to look like as well, right? So all of these processes, I think, not only being kind of defined, but being properly documented for the people that are coming and being a part of your business, kind of can take on and read on and understand them and follow them accordingly, right? Another important thing about these processes is, as like I said, we have more teams all contributing towards the same code, is part of the kind of architectural reviews, right? Like I said before, one of the key things is making sure that the teams are not stepping over each other. As we are working on certain new features, part of the process that we're implementing right now, where I'm working at, where we are at 20 teams and looking to be 25 different teams, it's at first it was seen as like, oh, you're slowing down our software development process, but we started enforcing architecture reviews. Before we even write any single line of code for any of the new features, there's this architecture review where it outline, okay, how are we solving this problem that product just gave us, right? From an architectural perspective. We added sequence diagrams in there. Do we need new tables? Do we need to modify our schema in any way, right? This is how we're solving it, etc. And making sure that the architects in the room across all of our different teams review that, make sure that it doesn't conflict with the other work that the other teams are doing, sign off on that, and then that's when we can start, right? So it's a growing pain having to do such things, but it's part of the business. If you want to grow and you want to have multiple teams working at the same time, it's something that must be done to save trouble down the line, right? And then one of the last things that I think all of what I've just mentioned, I think it's important, but the most important thing in my opinion is making sure that communication is enabled across all these different teams, right? Especially in these days after COVID, where everybody's remote, working at different time zones here and there. It's fine, but I mean, personally, like I'm on Zoom all day. Everybody turns their camera on sometimes they don't. It's hard to build those relationships over a webcam. It is definitely hard, right? So one of the critical things that I think as you're scaling and you're bringing people from outside and you want them to drink the Kool-Aid from your business is investing in your culture and retaining such culture, right? There's many ways I think in which you can do that, but I think you can have kind of upsides every now and then, right? You're not gonna make everybody go to an office, otherwise people are gonna leave, right? But making sure that you're communicating what the values are for your business, what's the vision of the business, what's ahead of them, so that they can be a part of the organization, right? And that they can contribute just as a small team that started it all contributed in the first place, right? So I think I went a little bit kind of quickly into this. I think I was going to take a little bit more time to go through this, but I don't know. I mean, I'd also like to be for this to be an open discussion, because I think there's definitely different players here in the space that have different challenges across this topic that I would like to kind of maybe talk through if there's any specific questions around this.
Do you have any examples or experiences of your own where you've seen companies successfully integrate the culture even as the team has grown?
Yes, absolutely. So I think for example, one of the accounts that I've been working lately, we do monthly all hands, right? I think most of the people do. The first slide, no matter what, all the time is company values, right? And it's the CEO always speaking about why we have such values and speaking about each one of those, right? So I think that's a very kind of easy way in which you can do that. But then at the same time, it's like those leaders in the business, the willingness in order to help and support, no matter what level of employee has a question, it's amazing. I haven't seen that anywhere, right? So it's the commitment of the founders and the kind of first few employees of that business, the way that they're collaborating with everybody else that is coming from outside. I think it's what's been successful in retaining that culture. There's things that will eventually change, right? Because as you start building your product and you want to get your MVP out and you want to get that first customer in, you're going to work long hours, right? Building that first MVP. And in those first few days, as you start bringing people from outside, you also need to be understanding that the people from outside might not have, although they're going to be invested in your business, they're not going to be as invested as you that started that business, right? And I don't think that will ever happen. You need to make sure to understand that, and that those individuals that are coming from outside have also other things outside work, right? So work-life balance is a thing. So just being cognizant of that, of the people that you're bringing outside, I think goes a long way for being successful in that. Any other question? I'm sure somebody has one. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Wow. There's
So I can't remember where I got the statistic, but your average software engineer, I think, at large companies, over 100 employees, their average tenure right now, I think, is 2.2 years. Smaller companies and startups, it's about 1.6. How do you combat that? It's, as an engineer, I can tell you that every single day you have a human being on the team working on the product, they're just they're more knowledgeable, they're more valuable. So for a company to spend 2.2 years basically training somebody on their system and then have all of that knowledge walk out on that specific system, that's a big loss of value. How do you combat that?
well. So I think that problem will always exist, right? I mean, people, especially I started my career as a software developer myself. So I've been in that position where like I've been in places where I started working and then I was like, I want to go into the next new shiny thing that's out there, right? So I think that will always be a thing. But how do you combat that? I think the way that, I mean, I tried myself to combat that is by what I just explained about making sure that everybody understands what the path down the road is for them in the organization if they stay, right? And I think try to stay away from those kind of conflictive situations, because I think there's always in engineers specifically, there's always this constant battle with like product and design, right? Like, oh, product is asking all these changes on me, and engineers at the end of the day are the ones that need to make that change happen, and they're not happy with product, especially on crunch time, right? So try to avoid those kind of situations so that the the work environment is a good environment for everybody. I think there's ways, that's a few ways in which you can combat that, but at the end of the day, you'll have that turnaround. So that's something that I think you have to gotta deal with, and making sure that there's people down, well, not down necessarily, but there's people that will take that spot eventually, right? It's gonna hurt and it's gonna suck for a little bit, losing that knowledgeable resource, but there's people that are gonna step up and be as knowledgeable, maybe if not more, eventually, right?
I love the talk and love the piece around standardizing procedures, the PMO office, and then the culture. I want to talk a little bit about culture. Have you ever heard of the Culture Code by Dan Croyle? It's a great book. He talks about psychological safety, sharing vulnerability, and like the common purpose. So you touched on a lot of that stuff, but I was just curious how you push good culture, how you push, psychological safety so we can fail and, learn from it, fail fast and move on. Just feel like as you're scaling, it's like kind of two things like pulling at each other, opposite sides a bit.
Yeah. So I think that's a key thing that you mentioned, right? Failing, right? And obviously in this business, we're going to fail and we're going to ship bugs. More than we want to, right? But I think part of what you just mentioned, it just came to mind. One of the CTOs that I work with, it's a great guy, but he's the one that communicates to all of the engineering team that it's okay, we're gonna chip bugs, and I understand that. I don't care. We're here to ship the best product that we can, and when we find bugs, I guess the key thing that he emphasizes on, like, we need to find them, right, so that we can solve them. But we will ship bugs. So we'll fail more than we want to fail, right? But just when it's a founder and CTO is communicating that to the junior dev that just kind of starting as a software developer in his career, it's kind of refreshing in a way that like, okay, it's fine if I ship this with a bug here and there. I'll try not to, right? Obviously, I'll try to do my best, but it's refreshing for them and calming in a way that the leader of the business is communicating such a thing, right? Yeah, there's
So just curious about one of the things you said, because we are going through the same phase where we are having that mixture of scaling development teams and trying to install culture. And what we ended up doing was, and I wondered if you'd ever seen somebody do this, we made the executive decision to essentially move all our offshore development resources into a single country and a single location. So we had like multiple developers in multiple countries and moved everybody into one country. And we have assigned a person in that office whose job is nothing but to work on corporate culture and instill the working methodology across the teams in that one building. And we found we can control it much better because everybody is now in one workspace, essentially. Wondered if you'd ever come across anything similar.
I haven't seen that before. I'm curious. Is it? I guess how long ago was this, and is it working?
So we made the decision about a year and a half ago, and it's definitely working.
Okay.
We can talk about that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I think my first impression would be like, I think it would do the opposite thing, right? Like, if you're kind of letting people being remote and working from the beach and whatever they would like to work from, and then kind of moving everybody into a single location. I don't know if there's an office involved or not. I would think it would do the opposite, but if it's not, I would like to see how it's working. Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's definitely a little bit of because myself, I mean, I like to think of myself as a blend of, I think there's a word for it, but like a little bit of introvert, a little bit of extrovert. I think there's a word. I can't remember the word. But I do miss a little bit. Before COVID started, I was traveling Monday through Thursday, working neck to neck with my clients, and then flying back home. That was my life. Like it was ridiculous. I don't think I'll ever go back to that lifestyle, but last year before COVID, I had like 256 hotel nights in a calendar year. And I was like, I was on the road forever. And I had a little, my older daughter now at the time, she was a little baby. But when COVID started, I was working from home and I still continue working from home. But I do miss that social interaction of just talking to people, to whoever's next door, or not next door, like sitting next to you. So I do miss a little bit of that. So maybe there's something in there of having a common space kind of like this and having people come, maybe not every day, but every now and then, and share a space and all of that. So
we're emphasizing a lot. So thanks. One of the things you emphasize a lot is that people will leave the company usually because they don't like the person they're working for, the team they're working with. It's very rarely about the company cultures, the product, and it's usually about the team and the people there. So we always emphasize the fact that if you have personal trust and personal loyalty within your team or with your management team, you're more likely to keep your employee for longer.
That's a great point, and I think that's one of the one of the things that we make an emphasis on is so if you think from a staff augmentation model, right, and you're deploying resources here and there, and they contribute to form teams or to other things. What we're working with right now is building teams, right? So that all of that ways of working and really bonding as a team, we take care of before we deploy them to an account or a customer, right? So that is true because I mean we see it all the time where I have a few of them in Instagram, and they post stories that they live all in different places all across the country, but they meet up on their own dime. Just to hang out on the weekend, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like they're in the trenches every day, coding and getting product chipped, and they're buddies now, right? So yeah, that's cool to see as we're working with these teams.
Yeah. So one of the major points you talked about was processes, right? Code reviews, architectural reviews, communication. Much of the time, that company culture thing, as kind of being on the ground, does get back to that kind of agile versus waterfall slider and sort of fight, right? And so every large organization I've ever seen winds up just inching closer and closer and closer and closer towards that waterfall side of the of the slider, right?
Nobody wants to admit it, but yeah.
Yeah, right. And like, even if you start talking about agile, are you talking about safe? Are you talking about right? And so my question, have you ever seen an organization that's able to keep a lot of those principles, the 4 value points and then the 12 principles, in any large organization. I've failed and I've talked to other human beings who have, but I've never seen it, right?
Yeah.
My question, but at the end of the day, one of my favorite lines out of there is the most efficient teams you will ever have are self-organizing.
Yep.
Is there ever going to be space for that in large organizations? Is that just the second you decide that I'm going to be a large organization, you should pretty much just throw all that out the window?
So that's yeah, that's an interesting. We can talk about that for days. So yes, I agree with that. When you start dealing with larger organizations, larger teams, I like to call it agile fall, right? Because you would like to keep the same principles of agile in your process and in your day to day. But at the end of the day, now you're requiring sign-offs here and there, and now you're expecting your spec to be ready, and all these things that make it seem like it's a waterfall, right? So, but there's a little bit of both. With the self-organizing element of things, what I like to do is I don't like to compare teams to teams, right? Because every team is different. Like if somebody is developing 10 points a sprint and somebody else is developing 20 points a sprint, I don't see that as a bad thing. They just have different velocity. They're working on different things. That's fine. But there are certain things that I like to measure across teams, right? And as you're dealing with stakeholders and as you're kind of working with the board and making sure the product is being shipped on time and we're getting that revenue out of the features that we're working on and all that stuff, there needs to be some sort of baseline that you're measuring across all your teams, like a common baseline across all, right? But once that baseline is defined and understood by everybody, that's where the self-organizing comes. Like, I don't care if you do the ceremonies in such way that are different from this other team. If that works for you, that's fine. As long as you meet this, and which is basically your deadline that you're giving, I'm cool with that, right? So I think in larger organizations specifically, I think I've seen it now more that there's room for self-organizing, but it's not all only self-organizing, right? So there's a little bit of structure in place, there are processes in place that need to be followed, and then there's a little bit of room for that flexibility and self-organizing. Whether that is what's actually desired by such teams, that's a different story maybe, and we can maybe chat offline about that. But at least that's what I've seen kind of work well for everybody, right?
I do have a follow-up.
Yeah.
You talk very much about that baseline and deadline specifically. I can't remember, it's the Basecamp guys who wrote It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work, right? And one of the big things they talk about is if you ever have a fixed scope and a fixed deadline, and you commit both of those, you're destined to fail, right? Yeah. Is there any wiggle room? Because at the same time, every organization I've ever been at wants those two things as well, right? If you tie it to the deadline, can you actually sit there and be accepting of whatever the scope winds up being? And if not, what do you do? Because I've been in so many projects where it's been, you have that fixed scope, and we didn't hit that fixed scope by the deadline.
Yeah.
How is that the metric we should be using as deadlines?
Well, so I think it has to be, right? I mean, I think at the end of the day, the work that's being done, the software that is being developed will eventually kind of generate some sort of revenue at some point, right? And that revenue is expected for the business, right? So there needs to be some sort of measurement of when are we thinking that we're going to ship that product out the door so that the customer can sign up for it, whatever, right? So, but I think at the same time, there needs to be some wiggle room because we're not in the business of an exact science. We cannot anticipate all of the difficulties that the teams are going to be dealing with, especially if you're dealing with third parties and you're dealing with integrations, et cetera, and you're dealing with APIs that you've never seen before and they're not properly documented, right? So there's a lot of risk in what we do that estimated deadline, it's almost to a point like a moving target, right? But as you get closer to such deadline, then it starts to become a little more and more clear, am I going to hit that deadline or not? And that's when I think you start having those conversations about kind of proactively, hey, it's not looking like we're going to hit it because X, Y, and Z, we might need more time, et cetera. So the fixed scope, I don't think there's ever going to be fixed scope. Fixed budget, maybe, but then when you start kind of sacrificing other things, right? So that's what I was saying. If things are going to change, something's got to give, right? So I think there's always three things that you can do when things change, right? Is either scope, it's either resources, or it's your timeline. That's it. That's all the three levers that you can pull and work with when you're dealing with change, right? So as long as everybody that has a seat on the table understands that, and I mean, that's also a critical thing, I think, because people would like to push for their deadlines, right? And not move and jump and give a little. But as long as they understand that and they're aware of the progress of the project, the risk of the project on a timely manner, then I think there's room for that flexibility, right?
Any more questions?
So I failed to introduce Nestor before, but I think you guys got to meet him very well.
Yeah. Well, you want to
I'll give you like a MBA flashcard kind of thing. You know, Nestor Cantu, right? That's how I Cantu. Bachelor's in computer science, 10 years. Started as a developer, doing 10 years of management. Now consulting for teams. So if you have any questions, please contact him. I know he'll be more than happy to keep communication going with anybody. And thank you for being here. And if you still have energy, there's still food and some drinks. Awesome.